Alright folks, welcome to Arduino for Beginners. This is Arduino 101. Today we're going to be going over the hardware side of an Arduino build. So this will mostly be covering the actual Arduino boards themselves. We will also touch on sensors momentarily to discuss some of the options and possibilities. And in the next video we'll be going over the software side of Arduino. So let's talk Arduinos. Here I have two different boards. I have a Uno and a Mega. These are both from two different manufacturers. They are both Arduino boards, and you'll notice that the Mega here has a whole bunch more hardware on it. Now those pieces are the output pins. There are input pins as well. Some of them are digital and some of them are analog. On this smaller board, these are the digital pins on this side, and these are the analog pins on this side. There are a way lower number of pins to choose from. Now, why is that important? Well, when you're talking hardware, and this is where we get into sensors, you can see this Uno has a laser sensor hooked up. So this is basically just a laser emitter. It is plugged in with two wires and wired directly to the Arduino here. So every time this little yellow light comes off, I'm outputting a high signal on that pin, and it's activating the laser. The other one is just a ground, and you can see that here because the nice thing about Arduinos is they are clearly labeled. So this white wire here is my ground. I know it's a little hard to see on the camera, but when you're holding one, they're pretty easy to read. And I'm using pin 13. So what does that mean? Well, in order to get any of these sensors to actually do anything, we need to push some software, what they call a sketch, onto the Arduino and ensure that it has power. Right now it's plugged into my computer, so it has plenty of power. There are other options for powering an Arduino, such as this adapter here. This is a 5-volt adapter, and this basically plugs into a breadboard like this, and it'll power both of the rails with little jumper switches for switching between 3.3 volts, 5 volts, and no power. It also has a USB in, so you can draw power directly from your computer, but I tend to keep this for plugging into my wall when I'm not near a device and I want to run something. There are a ton of other options as far as what you can do and what you can build with an Arduino. And just to give you a small idea of some of the things we're going to go over in this playlist, this is one of my boxes full of sensors. There's, I believe, a kit of 37 sensors in here. There might be one or two out on my table that I'm using that should be in this box, and I have some other boxes as well. So we're going to go over in individual videos what each of those sensors do and how to run the code to do them. In order to do that, you need to be familiar with your actual board itself. So there is a DC power jack on the board itself as well. You'll need to make sure that you have a 5-volt connection there in order to run the 5 and the 3.3 volts. Otherwise it'll be under power. It won't quite work properly. This is the USB port connection. Now you're going to need to use this to connect to the computer in order to push the sketch to the device. And we'll go over the software for doing that, and I'll show you the example that runs this laser emitter in the next video. For now, what we should do is get familiar with the actual parts of this machine. So we're going to focus on the Uno for most of these tutorials. So I've done away with the Mega board you saw a minute ago, and I've brought out this handy little diagram. Now this is a numbered diagram, and we're going to go over all of the points real quick and just kind of explain what they do. So I will be pointing as best as I can, and you should be able to find the corresponding number on the diagram as we are going through it. We are actually going to start with this guy here. So this is, as I said, the USB port. You can power it through this. That is number 1. Okay. And then if we skip over here to number 2, that is the barrel jack. I described that to you a moment ago, and that is number 2. So number 3 is actually going to be the voltage regulator, and that is right here. It's this little black piece with, you can see 3 connections coming off one side and a connection on the back. If you take a look at the Mega, we'll bring it back for a second. This is the voltage connector, and if you look really closely, you can see that it's burnt out. That piece melted a little bit. So I overpowered this guy. It is possible, it does happen, and they're cheap to replace, only a couple of bucks. But let's move on to the next piece. So after that, you have the crystal oscillator. Now the crystal oscillator is in this little silver case right here. It's number 4 on the diagram. And what that does is helps Arduino deal with timing issues. So how does it calculate time? It uses the crystal oscillator. Okay, so the number printed on top of this little case right here is 16.000H9H, and it tells us that that's the frequency in hertz, or 16 megahertz. The next thing we're going to cover is what's known as the reset pin. Now the reset pin or the reset button, which are two different items, you can both use them to reset your Arduino and start the sketch from the beginning. And the reset pin is right here. You can't see it in the camera, but it is clearly labeled reset, and it is number 5 on the diagram. The reset button itself is the last one. It's number 17, and it's up here in the corner. You can see it here, and I can actually press that button and it will reload my sketch and start running it again. So after that, you have a couple of common pins that you're going to need to know about. Those are the 3 volt and 5 volt supplies, as well as the ground pins. Most of the components used with Arduino boards work fine with 3 volt or 3.3 and 5 volt. And the ground pins, there are several, and any of which can be used to ground your circuits. That's basically when you're returning power to the board to complete the circuit, you're going to want to go into a ground from usually one of the 2 pins that are plugged in this case. However, if there are more pins, a lot of the individual sensors are marked with a ground pin, and you're going to want to use that for the ground. The next thing we have are the analog pins. The analog pins are on this side, and those are number 10 over here. So with the analog pins, they can read a signal from an analog sensor like a humidity sensor or a temperature sensor and convert it into a digital value. So those are really handy for things that don't start off with a digital signal. And then the next thing we have to talk about is the main microcontroller. So this is basically the brain here. This holds everything you need and is pretty important part of this. The microcontrollers are usually from Amtel, and you must know what your IC, your board is, before loading a new program from the Arduino IDE. So this is basically saying that you need to know what kind of board you have, and you need to know what kind of chip you have. We'll get into that in the software side in a few minutes, and most of the time it will detect that on its own. So the next thing that we have here is the ICSP pin, or the ISP pin. So this is a in-serial programmer, sometimes referred to as an SPI, or serial peripheral interface. This is used to basically push the same sketch onto multiple Unos. So if you connect it through the right pins to another board at this location, you can duplicate it or clone it onto the next one. The next thing you have is the power indicator. That is the green light that indicates that the board itself is receiving power, not that it's putting power out. There are 3 other LEDs on here, including the TX and RX LEDs. Those light up when you transmit and receive information, respectively. And then we come to the digital I/O pins. Now, I/O stands for input output. You can use them for either. You have to declare that in your code depending on what you're doing with them, but it is pretty simple and self-explanatory. Those pins are located right here on this board. At the diagram, it is number 15. So they are numbered 13 through, I believe, 0. Yeah, 0. And 2 of them specifically labeled for receiving and transmitting to run those 2 little lights as well, so RX and TX. The next thing you see on the diagram here is the AREF. It stands for analog reference. Sometimes it's used to set an external reference voltage to limit things, so for analog plugins. And that is actually going to be located right here. And that is basically it. We already covered number 17, which is this reset button right here. And that basically covers the meat of this board. Now, really quickly, while we're here, there are a lot of similarities between this board and that board, except in this case, this is the brain. The reset button is located in the middle here. And you can still clearly see these are labeled digital. These are the input-output pins, way more than on an Uno. And then the ones with the A in front of them here These are analog pins, also clearly labeled. Then you have your power side of the board and a couple of LEDs. So pretty much the same, just a lot more pins to work with, which can be good if you're dealing with a larger project. And some of the projects we'll get into will be using boards that big. But for mostly using one sensor and showing you how things work, this is going to work out just fine. So that's going to be it for the hardware side of the Arduino Uno. Stay with us for the next video. We will talk about the software side, where to download Arduino itself, and how to update and get libraries so you can get working on testing out the sensors themselves.
Well, that's it, guys. That's going to wrap up this video. If you've noticed the shirt, the merch is available. Go ahead and check out the Teespring merch link down below. It won't be available on a channel store until I reach 10,000 subscribers, and so far I am just about to hit 5,000. So it'll be a little while, a couple more months before you see this on the actual channel, but they are available now. I have a couple other designs. Feel free to pop over there and check them out, and know that any purchase through the Teespring site definitely helps to promote our site here and increase the channel's ability to make videos in the future. So we appreciate all your support. Don't forget to check out the Teespring link, check out our Patreon link, leave a like on this video, and hit that subscribe button because we have a lot more coming at you in the coming days.